Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he's now threatening to defund the state legislature after Democrats staged a dramatic walkout that blocked very effectively the passage of a Republican bill that would have implemented tough new voting restrictions. Texas is the latest battleground over voting rights in America. Democrats there are actually now pleading with President Biden and with Congress to step up and act. CNN's Ed Lavandera is joining me now from Dallas with the latest on this. Ed, where do things stand right now?
Well, right now, lawmakers are waiting to see what Governor Greg Abbott is going to announce, a special session to come back and hammer out this voting bill that was essentially stopped in the very last hours of the legislative session by Democrats on Sunday night. But the governor here says that he's going to bring lawmakers back in a special session. But it's the timing of this that is unclear at this point, Kate. The legislature also has to hammer out the redistricting process because this state is getting 2 new congressional seats as well. So the question becomes, does the governor put all of these issues into the same special session? And that is not clear at this point. But the governor did fire off a tweet yesterday essentially saying that he is threatening to defund the legislative branch of Texas state government. Lawmakers here in Texas make about $7,200 a year. It is not a full-time job, but he is saying that no pay for those who abandon their responsibilities. That's obviously a threat to the Democrats who walked out of the legislative session on Sunday night. But what is striking about all of this, and the real problem here for the governor, is that article that he is threatening to veto in the state budget also funds the salaries of thousands of nonpartisan state employees that work in state government as well. So real questions as to whether or not the governor is going to follow through on that. But Democrats are saying they are vowing to continue fighting and will make it as hard as possible for this bill to pass at any point. A bill that contains things like banning voting past 9 o'clock at night. It would ban the unsolicited mailing of ballot applications, would also prohibit overnight and early Sunday morning voting. It would expand the access that partisan poll watchers would have at polling locations. It would stop drive-through voting as well. And one of the bigger concerns that many people here have in Texas is that they say it would lower the standard of proof for being able for judges to be able to overturn an election. So those are many of the issues that have been so controversial in this voting bill. Republicans say, they have the votes and that they describe this as a voting integrity bill. But this will be another long, hard, fought-out battle here when lawmakers have to come back to Austin for that special session.
In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott has promised to bring back the voting legislation during a special session. Texas Democrats are now asking President Biden for backup.
And we knew today, with the eyes of the nation watching actions in Austin, that we needed to send a message. And that message is very, very clear. Mr. President, we need a national response to federal voting rights.
So that plea to the White House comes as many civil rights and voting rights groups are wondering what the Biden administration will do to fight back against this wave of voting restrictions. Here's what they're telling The Atlantic's Ron Brownstein.
What we are experiencing since the election is the most serious threat to the core underlying principles of American democracy since at least the Civil War. And, amid all of this, you've heard very, very little from Biden presenting this as a threat to democracy.
All right, let's talk about this now with Hillary Rosen, a Democratic strategist and CNN political commentator, and Chuck Rocha, former senior advisor to the Bernie Sanders campaign. I wonder what you guys think about what Ron is hearing there. Hillary, to you first. Is Biden doing enough to combat the assault on voting rights? Because clearly some folks do not think so.
Yeah, I think the confluence of issues over the last couple of weeks have made this urgent inside the White House. I think they recognize that President Biden could end up being a one-term president, that he could lose at the midterms, not because people don't like his policies, but because of process issues around the country where these states are restricting voting. And I think you will see them, that is why they are thinking about compromising on the infrastructure bill so they can get through the Senate, get something done, and then move on to playing a little more hardball. I think it's critical for them to do that. I think that, Joe Biden, as you know, is not historically like to jam his colleagues, but he has just got to jam Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema on this because there really is no other alternative here around the country for Democrats.
We're going to talk about that in just a moment. I wonder, Chuck, what you think, though, here in the near term, if Biden waits too long to combat this assault on voting rights because he's looking at his legislative priorities, the ship may have sailed on a lot of these. Is he doing enough?
Yeah, he's taken the bully pulpit and he's doing exactly what we want him to do, which is leaning into that. You just played the clip of what he was saying Sunday at that memorial service of talking about this being a real problem. But when you look at this in this totality, Joe Biden can't pass legislation. He can just use the bully pulpit to push legislators, and he can do that. And he comes from this body, and he understands that. And he can go and talk directly in my home state of Texas about what's going on there and how the governor would call back in special session to limit people from voting, but would not call a special session because he can't keep the lights on in an ice storm. That's ludicrous. And as we talk to voters around the country in elections I'm working on right now in Virginia, in cities in Texas, and places around the country, people are talking to me about bread prices and gasoline prices, not about how it's wrong for people to be able to vote early. And I think they have to capitalize on that.
You mentioned Joe Manchin, Hillary. He spoke with the Daily Beast, and he seemed genuinely surprised that not enough Republicans voted for a January 6th commission. And I wonder, do you think, how is it possible that he was surprised here? I think everyone saw that coming, that this wasn't going to pass.
I think everybody sees, what Mitch McConnell is other than Joe Manchin. And look, the good news is that while Joe Biden can't pass legislation, he does have some significant influence. First, because he's popular across the country, but also because he actually has a very good relationship with Joe Manchin. And I think that relationship has to pay off. Look, Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema, both of them, they have a choice here. If they want to try and move legislation through regular order, which is what they say, which means subject legislation to the filibuster where it needs 60 votes, then they've got to take responsibility to go get those damn other 9 votes in the Senate. But if they can't, they've got to let Democrats end the filibuster and pass a voting rights reform bill, because literally Democrats across the country are going to suffer from their stubbornness.
Do you think, Chuck, that Democrats should get rid of the filibuster?
I do, and I do because of a couple of things. As we worked on races around the country, you saw this surge of folks participating. They're younger, they're multicultural, their ethnic backgrounds are so diverse. Well, a lot of these people fall into categories of needing to vote early. If you have a lot of money and you have a nanny and you have a lawyer, you're going to be able to go vote. But if you ride the bus to work and you have a couple of jobs, it's harder for you to vote. That's the coalition that elected Joe Biden. That's why it's imperative to political operatives like me who try to elect working class Democrats around the country to have more access to the ballot, because they just need more time to vote because they're doing so many things.
And on the flip side here, I'm sure it would be lovely in the near term for Democrats to not have to deal with the filibuster. Think about the legislation when they're in the minority and they are on the flip side of that, the legislation that they would watch sail through the Senate. What do you say to that?
It's scary.
Well,
no
I would
question.
say that
And there's a lot of risk in taking this step. But I think that what we've seen is that unless we do take this step, this has been a sort of we are bouncing back and forth year to year from high stakes issues in this country. And we've seen a lack of engagement on the Republicans to compromise at all. So I think we have to say, look, take this risk, move forward, try and bring the country along with you. And if there's one person I think who can do that, Joe Biden has that bully pulpit to do that. And I think that the stakes are just too high not to take the risk.
But Chuck, it will hurt. I mean, let's say that the Senate is controlled by Republicans in 4 years. Let's say, just hypothetically, or if 4 years, 8 years, whatever, a Republican is in the White House, we will be talking. And if there is no filibuster, you and your party will be in extreme pain for the legislation that is getting through Congress.
I wouldn't say extreme pain, but I would say it would be hard for us. But if they were to win this majority, let's think about this, Brianna. They would have to win seats in Ohio, Pennsylvania, in Florida, in places where there's lots of working class voters. And I think that they would have the same problem that we're having right now, which is some of these more moderate Republicans who wouldn't want to go way to the far right because that's just not who elected them. And that's where I think that we could have some compromise.
So even in the minority, you think Democrats would be okay with there being no filibuster?
Yes, I do. I think it's time for bold action. The American people are just sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Is that, you agree with that, Hillary?
Well, I think it's actually more fundamental. I think without ending the filibuster, or more importantly, without getting a voting rights